The war was finally over. The stars were quiet after many years of fire and blood. Ships no longer burned in the black sky, and the galaxy had entered an uneasy peace, but peace always came with a price. The human fleet had fought bravely. They had stood side by side with the proud alien empire against a common enemy, and when victory was declared, the aliens had called the humans to their grand palace. There, under the shining banners of 1,000 worlds, the humans were celebrated. One man stood out among them, a young human officer, scarred by battles but not broken. He was chosen as the hero who would receive the highest honor from the alien nobles. Yet he did not know that the honor waiting for him was not gold, not land, not titles. It was something far stranger. The palace of the alien noble was carved from black stone and glowing crystal. It rose high above the capital city, with towers that touched the clouds. Inside, music echoed through wide halls and alien warriors feasted on strange foods. The young human officer walked carefully, his boots clicking on the crystal floor. Every eye turned to him, watching, judging, measuring. At the throne sat the alien noble, tall and sharp with eyes like burning stars. His armor gleamed and his voice thundered across the hall. "Human warrior," he declared, "you fought with courage, you brought us victory, and so you will be rewarded." The crowd cheered, but the officer did not cheer. He only bowed his head politely, waiting. Then the noble raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. 2 guards appeared. Leading a figure forward, it was a young woman, pale and quiet, her eyes lowered to the ground. She wore a simple robe. Unlike the rich dresses of the court, her steps were soft, but there was a trembling in her hands. The officer looked at her in surprise. The noble's voice cut the air like a blade. "This is my sister," the noble said coldly. "She is of my blood, but she is useless to me. I give her to you as reward for your service. She will serve you now." Gasps filled the hall. Even the human officer felt his heart strike like a hammer. A sister, given away like a piece of property? He looked at her again, trying to read her face. She did not resist, she did not cry, she only raised her head slowly, and for a single moment her eyes met his. Those eyes were strange. They were not the eyes of a helpless girl. There was something fierce hidden deep inside, like a fire locked behind stone. But just as quickly, she lowered her gaze again. The court began to whisper, laughing, mocking. "She is weak," someone said. "She cannot fight," said another. "She is nothing." The officer stood still, his jaw tight. He had seen many things in war, but never had he seen a person given as a gift. The noble leaned forward on his throne. "Take her, human, she is yours. Do with her as you please." The hall roared with laughter. The officer clenched his fists. He wanted to speak, but he remembered where he was. He was standing before 1,000 alien warriors. One wrong word could mean his death. So instead he bowed slowly and said nothing. The sister walked to his side, moving like a shadow. No one noticed the way her hand brushed the wall as she passed. The crystal there pulsed faintly like it had felt her touch. But the court was too busy laughing. No one saw the flicker of light in her eyes. The human and the sister left the hall together, behind them. The laughter of the nobles echoed like a cruel song. But inside the officer's heart, questions burned. Who was she really? Why did the noble give her away so easily? And why did he feel that he had just stepped into a secret far greater than any war? Outside the palace, the alien city shone with towers of silver and glass. The streets were alive with strange creatures, banners, and firelights. The officer led the sister through the crowd. People bowed to him, the hero, but spat when they saw her. She walked in silence, never speaking, never showing pain. Yet the officer could not shake the memory of her eyes that did not look helpless at all that night. As he entered the quarters prepared for him, the sister followed silently, her steps like whispers on stone. He turned to her and finally spoke. "Why did you not resist them?" He asked him, "Why did you accept this so easily?" She lifted her face, the faintest smile touching her lips, and in a voice soft but sharp she answered, "Because, human, they have no idea what I truly am." The officer froze. The room grew colder, and for the first time, he wondered if the real war had only just begun. The human officer did not sleep that first night. The words of the noble's sister kept echoing in his mind. "They have no idea what I truly am." It was a quiet voice, yet it carried a weight that pressed against his thoughts. Who was she? Why would the noble call her useless if she carried such mystery? When morning came, the palace guards escorted him to the training grounds. The officer walked tall, but his eyes often drifted toward the figure beside him. The sister moved like a shadow, calm, silent, never speaking unless spoken to. She seemed fragile, almost too fragile to walk under the blazing alien suns. Yet there was a grace in her steps, a rhythm that felt unnatural. The other aliens in the palace laughed as she passed. "Look at her," one sneered. "A noble sister turned into a slave," another whispered. "She is cursed. That is why the noble gave her away." The officer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He was a guest, but also a prisoner of honor in this empire. He could not fight everyone who insulted her, and she strangely never showed anger, never even looked at them. She only lowered her gaze, walking on as if their words were nothing. That silence disturbed him more than their laughter. Silence could mean weakness, but silence could also mean patience, and patience often belonged to those who carried secrets. Days passed, and the human officer noticed strange details. At night, when the lamps in his quarters dimmed, the sister's eyes glowed faintly, not bright, just a shimmer, like the reflection of hidden stars. When she moved through the room, the air felt heavier. When she touched the crystal walls, faint ripples of light appeared. It was always subtle, so subtle that anyone else would dismiss it as imagination. But the officer was a soldier, and soldiers trusted patterns. And this was no illusion. One evening, as he sat writing reports for his command, he noticed his broken wrist device. Its screen cracked from war. The sister sat across the room, watching quietly. Suddenly, without warning, the device flickered back to life. The officer looked at it in shock. Her hands had not moved, but her eyes shimmered faintly. When he glanced at her, she quickly looked away. "Did you do this?" he asked softly. She gave no answer, only kept her gaze on the floor. But the device glowed brighter than it ever had since it broke. And in that silence, the officer felt the truth. She was no helpless girl, she was something else. Still, he did not press her. He decided to watch her carefully. If she wanted to hide her strength, he would let her. But his instincts told him that one day she would reveal it. The next day, he joined the alien warriors in the courtyard. They trained with their long spears and curved blades. The officer was invited to spar, and he did. Moving with skill that impressed them, the sister stood at the edge of the grounds, watching silently, but the warriors mocked her again, laughing that she did not fight. "She is nothing but a burden," one shouted. "She cannot even hold a weapon," another added. The officer's blood burned, but before he could speak, the sister raised her eyes for just a second. Her gaze fell upon one of the weapons on the rack. The blade trembled just for a heartbeat. No one noticed except him. He froze, staring at her. But she had already lowered her eyes again, her face calm, silent. The warriors kept laughing, never realizing the truth stood right in front of them. That night, the officer sat alone in his quarters. The sister sat quietly in the corner. Finally, he broke the silence. "You are not weak," he said, his voice firm. "You want them to think you are weak, but I know the truth." For the first time, she looked directly at him without lowering her eyes. Her voice was soft but sharp. "You should not speak of things you do not understand," she whispered. "They will hear. They will take me away, and they will destroy me." The officer leaned forward, his chest heavy with questions. "Why?" he demanded. "What are you? What are you hiding from them?" Her lips trembled, but then she fell silent again. Her hands folded tightly in her lap as if holding back a storm, and he realized she would not speak, not yet. The silence returned, thicker than before, a silence filled with secrets, a silence more dangerous than open war. The human officer lay awake that night, every flicker of light, every soft breath of air made him think of her. The noble had called her useless, cursed, fragile, but the officer knew better. She was not helpless, she was waiting. And whatever she was waiting for, it was coming closer with every passing day. The palace never truly slept, even at night. The towers glowed with alien fire. The halls echoed with distant music, and the city below buzzed with life. But inside the human officer's quarters, silence ruled. Only two souls remained in the dim light, the officer and the sister. And with every night that passed, the silence became heavier, like a secret waiting to break. The officer had learned one thing clearly. The noble's sister was not as helpless as she appeared. Her quiet eyes hid something vast, something dangerous, and though she said little, her very presence seemed to bend the world around her. It began with small things. Doors that should have been locked simply slid open when she walked past. A broken communicator suddenly worked again after she touched it. The air around her sometimes shimmered. Like heat rising from stone, the officer noticed everything. Because he was trained to see patterns, and now the pattern terrified him. One evening, the officer sat by his desk. The sister sat near the crystal wall. Staring into its glow, he tried to focus on his reports, but the sound of the wall humming drew his attention. The crystal pulsed faintly, as if breathing with her. He rose from his chair, stepping closer. Her eyes glowed for only a second before she blinked. The wall fell silent again. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head, lips sealed. "I saw it," he insisted. "The crystal responds to you." Her gaze turned sharp, cutting through his words. "Do not speak of it," she whispered. "Not even to me." That night he could not sleep. The palace guards patrolled outside, but inside, the true danger sat quietly in his room. The noble had given her away like trash, yet she had the power to touch the very stones of the palace. Why? What was she hiding? The next day, strange whispers spread through the palace. Some claimed the human hero was bewitched by the noble's sister. Others said she carried a curse that would bring ruin. The officer ignored them, but he noticed the guards watching him more closely. Their eyes lingered on her, full of suspicion, and the whispers followed everywhere they went. That night, the officer decided to test her. He placed his broken sidearm on the table between them. The weapon had been dead for weeks. Wires burned, crystal core shattered. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Can you fix it?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to the weapon, then to him. She did not answer, but a soft hum filled the air. The weapon glowed faintly, sparks dancing across the broken core. The officer's breath caught in his throat. Then, as quickly as it began, the glow vanished. The weapon remained broken, but for that one heartbeat it had lived again. "You can," he whispered. "I knew it." Her face hardened. "You must never say such things," she warned, her voice almost trembling. "They will hear, and they will come." The officer leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Who will come? Your brother? The council?" She closed her eyes, and for the first time, fear crossed her face. "No," she whispered. Something worse. The room grew colder. The officer felt his skin crawl as if unseen eyes were watching. But when he looked around, there was nothing. Only silence. He sat back slowly, unsure if he had just imagined it. From that night onward, the officer began to dream. Dreams of vast empty space, of stars burning out, of voices whispering in languages he did not know, and in every dream the sister stood at the center, glowing, holding something small and fragile in her arms. When he woke, sweat covered his skin, but she was always awake, sitting in silence as if she never slept, watching him, waiting. The whispers of the palace grew louder. Some claimed the sister carried death in her blood. Others said she was pregnant with something not of this world. The officer tried to ignore it, but each day, the laughter of the nobles grew sharper, the stares of the guards colder. They treated him as a hero, but her as a curse, and he began to fear that the day would come when they would try to separate them. One evening, as he walked the palace balcony, the sister followed quietly. The alien city stretched beneath them, glowing with fire and crystal. The officer turned to her, his voice low but firm. "You are not weak, you are not helpless. I have seen what you can do." For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the city. Then at last she whispered, "Whispers travel faster than truth, and soon the whispers will bring death." Her words chilled him, and as the wind howled through the balcony, the officer felt for the first time that the true war had not ended at all. It had only just begun, and it was standing right beside him, silent, waiting. The palace seemed louder than ever. Whispers floated through every hall, whispers about the noble sister and the human officer. Everywhere they walked, eyes followed, voices hushed, and laughter turned sharp. The human was a hero, but the sister was treated like a shadow, a curse, a danger, and though she never spoke of it, the officer could see the weight pressing against her shoulders. One night, the officer found her standing at the window of his quarters. The alien moon shone across her pale face, making her eyes glow faintly. For a long time she said nothing, and he did not disturb her silence. But then, in a voice softer than the wind, she spoke. "You wonder who I am," she whispered. "You wonder why I was given to you." The officer stiffened. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to finally open the door to the truth. "Yes," he said firmly, "tell me." She turned to him, her face calm but her eyes full of storms. "I was never meant to be a gift," she said. "I was meant to be destroyed." The word struck him like a blade. "Destroyed?" He echoed, his voice low. "Why?" She stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly. "My brother feared me," she said. "He feared what I carry, what I am, and what is inside me." The officer's heart pounded in his chest. "Inside you?" he asked, his throat dry. She placed a hand gently against her stomach. For the first time, the truth burned in her voice. "I am already with child," she whispered. "And the Empire fears the blood of this child more than it fears any enemy." The officer's breath caught. Pregnant, the nobles had mocked her, called her useless. But all along she carried something the Empire wanted erased. He stared at her, searching her eyes. "Who is the father?" he asked carefully. Her lips curved into a bitter smile. "That is the forbidden truth," she said, "and once you know, your life will never be the same." The officer clenched his fists. He felt the walls closing in. Every whisper he had heard, every suspicious stare, every mocking laugh, it all made sense now. She was not given away as a gift. She was given away to be hidden or destroyed in secret. Her brother had wrapped his cruelty in the disguise of generosity. "Tell me," the officer pressed, his voice heavy with urgency. She shook her head slowly. "Not yet," she whispered. "You are not ready to bear this truth. And the palace is not safe for such words." Her eyes darted toward the walls as if unseen ears were listening. "They are always listening," she added, her voice trembling. The officer felt a chill crawl down his spine. He turned toward the crystal walls, running his hand along the surface. Cold, smooth, silent. But in his mind he could almost imagine the palace itself breathing, watching, recording. He stepped back, his heart heavy. She was right, this place was no home. It was a cage. That night the officer's dreams grew darker. He saw the sister standing in a sea of fire, her stomach glowing with light. He saw shadows reaching for her, armies of faceless figures screaming in terror. And in her arms, she held a child wrapped in burning stars. When he woke, sweat covered his body, and his heart thundered like a war drum. She sat by the bed, watching silently, her eyes knowing, her face unreadable. The next morning, the palace changed. Guards stood closer to them, their eyes sharp, their steps heavy. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were sharp voices. "They say she carries a weapon," one guard muttered. "They say the child will destroy us all," another added. The officer's blood ran cold. The secret was no longer safe. That evening, the officer confronted her again. "They know," he said harshly. "The whispers have grown, they speak of your child. Of danger." Her face remained calm, but her voice was sharp. "Then the time is shorter than I hoped," she whispered. "They will come for me soon, and when they do, you must choose where you stand." The officer stared at her, torn between loyalty, honor, and something deeper he could not name. "You think I will abandon you?" he asked, his voice shaking. Her eyes softened for a brief moment. "No," she said quietly, "but I fear what will happen when you finally see the truth of me." Her words lingered in his mind like a blade. The truth was coming, the palace was closing in. And the child she carried was not just hers. It was a storm waiting to break. The officer looked at her one last time before the night swallowed them. He could not escape the thought that the war was not behind them. It was inside her, and soon it would tear the galaxy apart. The palace no longer felt like a place of victory. It felt like a trap, a web of eyes and whispers. Every corner carried a shadow, every hall carried a secret. The human officer could sense it, and the noble's sister could feel it even more. The rumors had spread too far, no longer hidden whispers. They became sharp words spoken openly. "Her child is cursed," some said. "Her child is a weapon," others added. Every step the sister took, guards stared, their hands resting too easily on their blades. The officer walked beside her, his hand always near his own weapon. He could feel danger tightening around them like a rope. That night, as the sister sat by the crystal wall, she whispered, "They are coming for me soon." The officer turned sharply. "How do you know?" Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "I hear them in the walls," she said. "They think the stones keep their secrets. But the stones speak to me." Her words sent a chill down his spine. If she was right, the palace itself betrayed its masters. The next morning, the officer noticed changes. Extra guards followed them through the corridors. The servants who once bowed now avoided their eyes. Food brought to his quarters tasted strange. Bitter, he stopped eating, giving the sister only what he trusted. She did not complain, she only watched, silent, as if she already knew. One evening, while the officer trained in the courtyard, a group of alien soldiers gathered nearby, their voices low but sharp. "The council wants her," one muttered. "They will take her tonight," another replied. The officer froze, his heart pounding. They were no longer whispering rumors, they were planning. He tightened his grip on the training blade for the first time. He understood that his greatest battle had not ended with the war. It was just beginning, and it was inside this palace. That night, he told her. "They plan to take you," he said. His voice heavy, she looked at him without fear. Her face calm. "I know," she whispered. "I have always known they fear the child." Her hand rested gently on her stomach, her eyes glowing faintly. "But they do not understand. The child is not a weapon, the child is hope." The officer felt his chest tighten. He wanted to believe her, but the palace's whispers painted only fear. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice low. Her gaze burned into him. "Because you have seen what I am," she said, "and still you walk beside me." Her words cut deeper than any blade. He realized that no matter the risk, he could not abandon her. Later that night, he heard footsteps outside the door, slow, heavy, too many to be a patrol. The sister rose silently, her eyes glowing in the dark. "They are here," she whispered. The officer reached for his weapon, his blood boiling. The door rattled once, then again. Voices hissed. "Open in the name of the noble." The officer stood tall, blade in hand. "You will not take her," he growled. The door crashed open, armored soldiers poured in. But before the first blade could strike, the room erupted in light. The sister stood still, her hands glowing with power. The crystal walls shook, the air trembled, and the soldiers froze in terror one by one. Their weapons fell from their hands as if ripped away by invisible force. The officer stared in shock, his breath stolen. This was no fragile girl, no helpless noble, this was something else. Something the Empire truly feared. The soldiers screamed and fled, the door slamming shut behind them. Silence returned, broken only by the officer's racing breath. He looked at her, his voice trembling. You could have done this all along." Her eyes glowed brighter, but her voice was calm. "Yes," she whispered, "but power must stay hidden until the right moment. Or it becomes a curse." The officer staggered back, trying to take in what he had seen. If the palace had feared her before, now they had reason to destroy her at any cost. "They will come again," he said. "Yes," she replied softly, "and next time, they will not run." He sank onto a chair, his mind heavy with questions. Who was she truly? What was this child she carried? And what kind of storm was about to break across the galaxy because of her? The sister walked to the window, her glowing eyes fixed on the alien city. "The hidden enemy is not only these soldiers," she whispered. "It is the council. It is my brother. It is the fear that binds them all, and soon. Their fear will burn the stars." The officer rose slowly, his grip tightening on his weapon. For the first time since the war ended, he felt the weight of a new battle, a battle he had not chosen, but one he could not escape, and deep inside, he knew the forbidden truth. Protecting her meant protecting the future, but losing her meant losing everything. The palace shook with whispers. The failed attempt to take the sister spread like wildfire. Soldiers spoke in fear, nobles argued in secret, and the council demanded answers. The human officer felt eyes on him everywhere he walked. But the sister walked as calmly as ever, her silence heavier than words for days. No one dared to move against them again. But the officer knew it was not safety. It was only the calm before a greater storm. And then one evening the storm arrived. The great hall of the palace glowed with fire and crystal. The noble sat high upon his throne, his armor shining like a dark sun. When the officer entered with the sister at his side, the hall fell silent. Every noble, every warrior, every servant turned to stare. The noble's eyes burned. "Human," he thundered, "I welcomed you as a hero, I honored you with a gift. And yet you repay me with betrayal." The officer froze, his hand tightening on his sword. "What betrayal?" he asked coldly. The noble rose from his throne, his voice cutting like steel. "You protect my sister. Though she is cursed, he declared, you shield her, though she carries danger in her womb. You stand against me in my own house. Gasps filled the hall. The counselors murmured in fear, their eyes darting to the sister. The officer stepped forward, his voice firm. She is no curse, he said. She is no danger, she is alive, and she has a right to live. The noble's face twisted in rage. You fool, he roared. Do you think I gave her to you as a gift? No, I gave her to you to rid myself of her. She is not meant to live. She is meant to be purged. The sister lifted her face, her eyes glowing faintly. She did not speak, but her silence was louder than his fury. The officer's blood boiled. So that was your plan, he spat. You call it honor. But it was only murder in disguise. The noble raised his hand and soldiers poured into the hall, their blades drawn. Seize them, he commanded. Kill the human, take the girl, and end this once and for all. The officer drew his weapon. Standing tall, the sister moved closer, her hand brushing the crystal floor. The air trembled. The palace itself seemed to awaken. As the soldiers charged, the walls shook, lights burst, and the sister's power erupted. A wave of invisible force slammed across the hall. Soldiers crashed into walls, blades shattered. Banners tore from the ceiling. The nobles screamed as the crystal pillars cracked. The officer stood frozen in awe, the light of her power blazing beside him. The noble roared in fury. Witch, he spat. You shame our blood, you will burn for this. The sister turned her glowing eyes on him. You call me cursed, she whispered, her voice echoing like thunder. But you fear me because you know the truth. I am stronger than you, and I carry the future you cannot control. The noble raised his massive blade, stepping forward, but the officer leapt in front of her, his sword clashing against the noble's strike. The hall rang with the sound of steel, sparks flying like stars. The officer's arms shook under the force, but he did not fall. He held his ground, protecting her. You will not have her, the officer growled. The noble's eyes blazed. You will die for her, he spat. Around them, the hall was chaos, soldiers trying to rise, nobles fleeing, the walls shaking under her power. The sister's hands glowed brighter, the floor beneath her feet cracking. Her voice rose above the storm. No, she declared. It is you who will fall, brother, for your fear has already destroyed you. The noble hesitated, his blade trembling for the first time. The officer pushed him back with all his strength. The sister stepped forward, her light filling the entire hall for a moment. The palace seemed to bow to her will. The crystals pulsed like living hearts. The wall sang with power, the nobles cowered. The soldiers dropped their weapons. The noble's face twisted with rage and fear. You dare defy me, he shouted. You dare stand above me. The sister's eyes blazed like twin stars. I dare to live, she whispered, and I will not let you kill what I carry. A final surge of power shook the hall. The noble was thrown back, crashing against his throne. His armor shattered. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling of broken crystal. The officer turned, his breath heavy. His blade lowered. The sister stood tall, glowing, unbroken, and for the first time, every noble and soldier in the hall looked at her not with mockery, not with pity, but with fear. The noble dragged himself to his feet, his eyes burning with hatred. This is not the end, he hissed. You will not escape me. But his voice was weak. Trembling, the officer and the sister stood together, the hall broken around them, and though the battle was over, both knew the war had only just begun. The palace lay in ruins. Shattered crystal walls hummed weakly. Broken pillars leaned like wounded giants, and the once proud banners of the noble family hung in tatters. The great hall, where laughter and pride had once ruled, was now silent except for the sound of falling dust. The human officer stood among the wreckage, sword lowered, breath heavy. Beside him, the sister glowed faintly, her power still trembling in the air. The nobles who remained watched from the shadows, their eyes wide with fear, their voices silent. The noble himself crawled to his throne. His armor cracked, his pride shattered, but still his voice rose in anger. This is not victory, he spat. This is rebellion. The Empire will never accept you. The sister's gaze turned to him, calm yet burning. No, she whispered. It is not rebellion. It is survival, and the future cannot be stopped. Her voice echoed through the hall, and even the walls seemed to tremble at her words. That night, the officer guided her away from the palace. The alien city below was restless, rumors spreading faster than fire. The people whispered of the noble sister who had faced her brother and shattered the hall. Some called her cursed, others called her blessed. But all agreed on one thing. She was no longer helpless, days turned into weeks, and the officer hid her away from the eyes of the Empire. They traveled through old ruins, through the silent deserts, through the dark corners of the alien world where guards would not follow, and all the while the sister grew weaker, her steps slower, her breaths heavier. The officer knew why. The child was coming. He stayed close, guarding her with every heartbeat. At night, when the stars filled the sky, she spoke softly. "They fear the child because it does not belong to their empire," she whispered. "They fear it because it will unite what they have tried to keep apart." The officer listened, his chest heavy. "You speak as if this child will change everything," he said. She looked at him with glowing eyes. "It will," she replied, "because it is more than human, more than alien. It is the bond between two worlds." Then, one night in the ruins of an old temple, the child came. The air shook as if the stars themselves leaned closer to watch. The sister cried out, her power spilling across the temple walls. Glowing symbols long forgotten. The officer held her hand, steadying her, protecting her from the shadows that seemed to creep closer. The night was endless, but when dawn came, the cries of a newborn filled the air. The child glowed with a light unlike anything the officer had ever seen. Its skin shimmered faintly. Its eyes burned like tiny suns. It was not fully human, nor fully alien. It was something new, something greater. The officer stared in awe, his throat tight, and the sister smiled weakly, whispering, "They called me useless, they called me cursed. But here lies the truth. I carried the future." The ruins trembled. The light spread outward in the distance. The people of the city saw the glow rise into the sky. They fell silent, bowing in fear and awe. The Empire had tried to destroy the child, but now the child had come into the world with power no army could silence. The noble, broken but unyielding, learned of it soon after. From his shattered throne he swore vengeance. "The child must die," he growled, "before it grows strong enough to end us." The council whispered in terror, but none dared move against the glowing truth that had already shaken the stars. The officer cradled the newborn, his eyes hard with resolve. "No one will touch this child," he vowed. The sister lay back, exhausted but alive, her eyes still shining with quiet fire. She whispered, "The galaxy will change whether they want it or not, and this child will be the reason." The officer looked at the child, and in that moment he understood. This was not the end of the war. This was only the beginning of something far greater. Empires would rise and fall, stars would burn and fade, but this child would carry the hope of two worlds. The sister closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. "They gave me away as a worthless reward," she whispered. "But they did not know. I carried destiny in my arms." Her voice faded into sleep. Her strength spent, the officer remained awake, holding the newborn, watching the dawn rise over the alien sky, his heart heavy but full of fire, and as the first rays of light touched the ruins, the officer whispered softly to the child, "This is only the beginning."